I asked him about that, but I can't remember saying about this. It's, I talked with him.
Greg, is this the Arbor Day Foundation something that should go to, I don't know,
Well, that's my question.
the committee or somebody? I mean, I'm sure they get it.
Can I open it?
Sure.
But I did talk. He says a lot of times. From a vast majority.
Yeah, it says Tree City USA membership.
He said the same
We get this signal.
inside, the same thing happens.
Does he?
He said that happens every year. I don't have a problem with this. I don't want to get hurt. You just have something like that. If we were at large.
Okay. It is 6:30, and I would like to welcome everybody to the December 4th Abingdon Town Council meeting, and I would like to ask the clerk, Cecile Rosenbaum, to call the roll, please.
Mr. Craig,
Here.
Ms. Patterson,
Here.
Mr. Howard,
Here.
Mr. Humphries.
Here.
And Mayor Lowe.
Here.
And let the record reflect that all 5 council members are present.
Okay. And with that, I will ask Mr. Wayne Craig if he will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we have 2 sets of minutes, council, the November 6th regular meeting minutes and November 15th mid-month work session minutes. What's your pleasure?
Mayor Lowe, I move that if there's no changes, that we approve those minutes.
Okay, as presented. Do I have a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Craig,
Aye.
Ms. Patterson,
Aye.
Mr. Howard,
Aye.
Mr. Humphries.
Aye.
Mayor Lowe.
Aye. We do not need to have an executive session, which is E, and so it is now public comment time, and no one signed up for public comment. So before I move on, do we have anyone that would like to speak? Okay. All right, thank you. Before we get started, if you will, please look at your cell phone and make sure that it is turned off or on silent. Okay. So we are down to petitions, public hearings, and first reading of ordinances. First reading, proposed rezoning, applicant Marathon Realty Corporation to
Are you going to go to?
Oh, I am so sorry. I was supposed to remember that, and I didn't. We would like to move the audit and then Mr. David Rose up to the this portion of the agenda if council has no objection.
I don't have any. I don't have any.
Okay. So first, we're going to have our auditors, the representatives from Brown Edwards, to talk to us about the audit. And I think that council, you received the audit separately.
We have the pleasure of having Jordan Owens with us this evening. He was the lead auditor and the managing auditor on the town's audit. He'll be presenting the information to you. And we also have Stephen Bowles, who's a managing partner out of the Bristol office here as well. He's from Stanford Wrestling. You're welcome.
Okay.
Jordan. They've already come.
Good evening, Town Council. I'm Jordan Owens. I'm with Brown Edwards. I'm here to present this is our second year providing audit services for the town of Abington. Just a little bit of context for this evening's discussion. We're going to go over just a few of the highlights of the comprehensive annual financial report. We'll also go over a couple of findings that we had, that we found during the audit. Just kind of want to start off saying we had constructive conversations with management. Their support of the few reporting and accounting changes that we noted, and have indicated that they agree with our audit findings. We feel like we have a good relationship with town's management and the finance team, and they really helped us significantly in completing the audit, and we had a good audit for fiscal year 17. Just to begin with a timeline, we began our audit in mid-June of 17. We started the process just understanding internal controls, testing some compliance steps that are required by the Auditor of Public Accounts, as well as completing an examination of Virginia Retirement System submissions and data that was submitted to the auditor on the government-wide level financial statements. The total assets on the statement of net position, which is Exhibit 1 in your report, is $46,278,574. That represented a decrease of $920,000 from fiscal year 16 deficiency related to the financial statements. That's reported as finding 2017-001 under Section B. This was just an item that didn't actually represent any type of changes on the fund level, but we did write off some bond issuance costs that, in accordance with GASB 65, aren't allowed to be capitalized. You can see down through there the recommendation and then the views of responsible officials. That was adjusted for the audit. That was the only adjustment that we made for the audit that was required to be reported here. The next finding is on page 77. It's the Commonwealth Virginia Conflicts of Interest Act. This is just over the conflict of interest statements, the disclosure statements, and there were a handful of statements that just were filed a couple of days beyond the actual required deadline in January of 17. That's about all on that one. The representation letter that management signs given to us is also attached, and any uncorrected misstatements is the final page of that report.
And you said there was a decrease in net assets of 970?
The decrease in assets. There was actually an increase in the fund balance anyways. And that was primarily just some cash, some prepaid assets. It was in several different categories. It wasn't anything significant to one category.
Thank you very much. Council, do you have any questions before Mr. Owens? Okay.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thanks, George.
And now we will hear
Questions before
from our financial advisor, Mr. David Rose.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to hand out this presentation.
Thank you.
Again, good evening. My name is David Rose, and I've had the good fortune of working with the town since about 1990. So I'm going to try to make this brief this evening, because I know you have a big agenda. I must add that, number one, we're not asking for you to take any actions. This is totally just educational. It's to start. We've got some 30-plus pages, so I'm going to move very quickly. I know you all are seeing this for the first time, and again, it's just the beginning of some education. I can come back or not come back as you wish. The second point I'd like to make is that when it comes to the talk here about the Meadows project, my job is not to be for or against the project. I have no position on that. My job is to let you see what the potential cash flows and implications are of the project on the town. So that is my role as financial advisor to you. But that being, yes, sir.
Just one thing, I don't mind if you take time, and I'm not sure how the rest of the council feels, but you can take all the time you want to. We can be here all night.
Well, again, I appreciate that. The other council members will probably be very upset with me, but I will try to.
We can poll them.
Okay. But having said that, on page 1, the goals and objectives, what I would like to do this evening is provide you all with an update on the town's finances. As you know, recently, a little over a year ago, we went and had the town formally rated by the 2 national major credit rating agencies, Moody's and Standard & Poor's. They are independent, and I'm going to talk about their review because their point is it's a barometer, a bellwether, however you want to call it, of the town's overall financial standing. They too don't get into whether they like a project or dislike a project, but they talk about the impacts as they see it on the town. Third point here is to let you know that the town has certain financial policy guidelines. Those are all being adhered to, and anything going forward would continue to assume that we're going to do that. That's very important to keeping your ratings, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, particularly in the area of the unassigned fund balance, and that really is your available dollars in the rainy day fund. That's how I like to call that. Fourth,
Mr.
yes,
Davenport,
ma'am.
I have a question, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Is this on, I'm sorry, Mr. Rose,
Yes,
I'm
that's right.
sorry. Is this not on the PowerPoint for the audience to see?
I don't believe
Is it on
so.
the
I don't think
PowerPoint?
so.
No.
Yeah. So, and we could certainly work to get the PowerPoint by all means, and we're happy to have this for everyone and anyone. So, again, the fourth point here is we have incorporated an estimated $10 million that would be borrowed by the town for the Meadows project. So we've layered that in to your overall finances. Want you to see what that looks like preliminarily under a series of scenarios. So with all that being said, let's go to page 2. There are basically 4 components to a credit rating. One, economic base. Both the Moody's and Standard & Poor's give that about 30% of their rating is your economic base. And you can see up the left-hand side, that's demographic characteristics, your tax base, industry, the mix. Basically, how healthy do they think the town is, the region is, and that's one of the 4 components. Right-hand side, also 30%, financial performance and flexibility. I must add, the demographics, the economic base, that's the one you have the least amount of ability to change in the short run. That's more of a macro driver. So that's important. The other 3, though, are really things you have control over. So your financial performance, you can see there, do you have a balanced budget? Do you have revenues and expenditures that are in sync? That's the type of thing you have control over from their perspective, and that's 30%. Then, on the right-hand side, management. They ask themselves, is the management looking at things from a long-term perspective? Do you have policies? And so you could see there, Moody's views that at 20%, S&P at 30%. So again, there's the 3 pieces for S&P. And then ironically, most people think credit ratings are all tied to debt. For S&P, the debt is actually the least important factor of your overall credit rating. It's 10%. So again, it's not that it's unimportant, but they care a whole lot more about the other 3 components. Moody's is at 20%. So again, even for them, that is as low or as equal to the low of 20% for management. So again, all of this plays into 100%. These are the 4 elements that go into your rating. So let's go to page 3 and look at your town ratings. There is basically 4 major categories in what's called the world of investment grade. the triple B categories, the A categories, the double A category, and then the vaunted triple A category. You are in that second to the highest category, the double A category. Each of those rating agencies then have subparts of that. So in Moody's, you're at the bottom of the double A category, but in S&P, you're in the middle of the double A category. In both cases, the words very strong, not my term, but their terms and how they look at you, the town. So when you look at the town of Abingdon, you are in a very good mode. I would point out, by the way, that when we did your initial ratings back around 1990, 1991, we did the Coombs Center back then. We started out, we were in the A range. That was the ratings that we had back in those days. So we've moved up another category, and the town overall is in much stronger shape than it was back then. All right, page 4 and 5 are the commentary. We've just taken a few of the key blurbs from both Moody's and Standard & Poor's. You can see here, and since, as Councilwoman Patterson said, since we don't have it on the screen, I'll read, if I could, what the Moody's commentary was, and that is, the AA3 rating incorporates the town's modestly sized tax base, stable tourism, and agriculture-based local economy, average resident wealth levels, strong reserves and liquidity supported by conservative fiscal management, and manageable debt and pension burdens. So that's their view. How could that rating go higher? If you have, as they say, their quote, significant tax base growth or enhancement of socioeconomic indicators. Needless to say, those are big drivers, long-term drivers. What could lead to the downgrade? Very simply, deterioration of reserves and liquidity, and the inability of a planned economic development project to generate sufficient revenues to cover debt service on the new debt, which would put pressure on the general fund, which is why in a few minutes I'm going to show you what we did to look at the revenues and how we treated those for this project. Page 5, Standard & Poor's. In the middle of that AA category, they have a series of comments. Adequate economy with projected per capita effective buying at almost 95.5% of the national level. Strong management with quote-unquote good financial policies and practices under our financial management assessment methodology, our meaning Standard & Poor's. Number 3, very strong budgetary flexibility with an available fund balance in FY 2015 of 29% of operating expenditures. And then finally, very strong liquidity with total government available cash at 62.4% of total government fund expenditures and 16 times governmental debt service. What they're saying is they see you as being in a healthy position. What could reach a higher upgrade? Once again, improvements in the economy, budget performance even scoring higher. What could lead to the downgrade? Just like Moody's, fiscal pressures and using the reserves. They're basically saying don't touch those reserves. And I'll go into that a little bit. So page 6, fiscal year 2017. What you just heard from the auditors was they're providing you with that opinion, a clean opinion. What we've seen here is that, again, the town is viewed favorably by the auditors and the national credit rating agencies. You finished in a strong position, but let me be clear. We have a policy, and it's right there in the middle. Total fund balance at or above $5 million. You finished the year about $75,000 below that $5 million. That's within shooting distance. But again, we want to make sure going forward that we're at least $5 million. And then lastly, your enterprise fund for utilities continue to be self-supporting. That is to say that the users pay for that. That's the type of thing we want to continue. So that's the first section I'd like to address. Now let me move on to your debt levels and talk about that. Page 8. So you have effectively three kinds of bonds or debt outstanding. General obligation, which we call tax supported. That basically comes from the general fund and other funds of the town. Revenue, which is self-supporting. That's basically your utility enterprise fund. And then a combination, capital leases and notes. Things for like fire trucks, copiers, things of that nature. So altogether, you have a little bit under $12 million of debt outstanding. General obligation is just under $3 million, self-supporting a little over $8 million, and those leases a de minimis amount of about $600,000. So, since 2014, the town has actually paid down about $3 million of debt. So you've moved in the right direction, and I just wanted to point that out. So on page 9, what we've shown is the various pieces, and you'll see there that collectively, debt service in fiscal year 2018 that we're in now, all together, is roughly $1.4 million. On the right-hand side, we've got this strange ratio called a 10-year payout ratio. What's that mean? What that means is basically, in 10 years, you will have paid off this entire indebtedness. So let me put that in perspective for the town and for the citizens. If you're fortunate enough to own a home, the average homeowner has a 30-year mortgage. It takes 30 years to pay off your debt. In the first 10 years, the average homeowner has paid off roughly 25% of their debt. The principal is down about 25%. You, the town, in the first 10 years, have paid off all of your debt. So you are coming from a position of strength by virtue of having all of your debt mature within 10 years. So I want to point that out. Okay, next page, page 10. What we then did was to break out the debt that really is the focus tonight, and that is the tax-supported debt. And why I say that? Because again, the revenue bonds, that $8+ million, comes and paid not from the general fund, but from user fees. That's considered self-supporting. What we're looking at then here is the general fund, the burden, if you would, that they did primarily their bond ratings on. So as you can see here, all the debt's paid off very quickly. On the bottom left-hand side, you can see what they are. We also incorporate the capital leases and notes because in reality, they are basically paid for by the general fund. So about $3.5 million all told. On page 11, you can see then how the debt stair steps down, as I said earlier. You look at just the general fund, and in 2018, the year that we're here in the middle of, we have roughly $525,000 of debt service. That's not principal, that's principal and interest. So what we find is that in 2019, it'll be almost the same, but in 2020, the debt steps down, so it's no longer $525, it's about $410. Then a few years later, it drops down to $265,000, thereabouts. And again, by 2028, a decade from now, we have no more payments. So we're in a good position. So let me go now to a peer comparison. Page 13. One of the things that we try to do, and have done this for you before, is to get away from a lot of the misperceptions that local folks might have of their particular local government, good or bad, thinking that either they have too much debt, too little debt, they're not as good as their neighbors, they're much better than their neighbors. So we try to get away from all that and say, fine, we have taken a look at you versus a peer group. And that peer group's based upon several factors. 1, solid credit ratings, if they have them. Number 2, relative population. 3, budget size. 4, similar services provided. And then 5, the input of the town and staff and council. So let me say this right up front. If you do not like the peer comparison, give me some feedback. We can change it. We can add to it. We can delete from it. Again, this is your document. It's the citizens' document. Again, we have no pride in this other than to put it together correctly. So we basically can change some things to have the kind of peers that you'd like to see. That said, on the next several pages, what we've tried to do is lay out this peer comparison, first by population. Again, this is an inexact science. So, for example, Blacksburg is amongst the largest, if not the largest town population-wise in the state. It's at 43,006. You're at about 8,200. So you said, well, population is similar. That's not similar. Again, not perfect, but what I would say is Blacksburg is on the cusp of Southwest Virginia. It's a vibrant town. It is highly rated, so we put them in there. Again, not perfect, but you can see the peer average is almost basically twice your size because Leesburg and Blacksburg skew that. Why do we put them in? Once again, they're highly rated, so we wanted to compare ourselves, not just to smaller places that may not have ratings or good ratings. We wanted to compare ourselves to the best. And Leesburg, for example, is AAA rated. Okay, next page. Real estate tax rate. You can see here that you have, versus the peer average of 19 cents, you're at 28 cents. So you are at the high end, in fact the highest, of this peer group. Blacksburg is closest to you at 25 cents. So again, we put that in there. We wanted you to see that. Next page. Assessed value per capita. What's that mean? That really means is you look at the values that Brown-Edwards turns around and says there's assets, there's values to the overall town, and then you divide it simply by the population. What you find is that you are almost $110,000 per capita. Anything north of $100,000 is considered very strong. So you are actually viewed quite strongly. Blacksburg is much lower, not because it's not vibrant, but because they count in the student body on that, and of course that sort of skews the numbers. But that, again, just I want to point that out. So they look like the weakest, but in reality they're solid. Again, you are in a very good position. Leesburg and Purcellville, we work with them. Purcellville is right next to Leesburg, basically 7 miles away in Northern Virginia. Their assessed values there are literally off the charts. Loudoun County, which they are in, is by various measures the wealthiest county in America in terms of median income. So you get a sense of all that. So you are really within shouting distance. You're above 100,000, really a very strong number. Page 17, tax-supported debt outstanding. Again, got to compare apples to apples. This really doesn't do it. I think when it does to a percentage, we'll get to that in a couple of moments. But it's just pure debt outstanding. Alta Vista and Ashland look like I missed that. Actually, they have no debt outstanding. Ashland's about to go into some indebtedness. Alta Vista will stay there where they are. At the same time, Abingdon, you're very modest, and you can see that. Very, very strong. Leesburg, you'll notice there, quite significant, and they do have a lot of debt, but they also have the wherewithal to fund that debt. Tax-supported debt per capita. So this is where we start to, again, try to meet apples to apples. And what you'll notice here, of course, Alta Vista, Ashland, having no debt would be at zeros for the moment. But the pure average is almost $950. And I'll add, that's actually a very strong number. That's not a big number. You, though, are less than half of that. So you start with a position of potentially taking on a project and $10 million of debt, being in a very, very strong position. And that's important for you to recognize.
Would you state that number per capita?
Yes, your per capita is $432, and the average of the peers is roughly, I'm going to round off, $950. Okay? So let's go to page 19. Tax-supported debt versus assessed value. Again, another one of those calculations. I don't think you're going to memorize this. That's why I hand this out, because again, it's about watching paint dry. But for us, it's what we care about. And so having said that, the peer average is, again, almost twice what you're at. Peer average is about 0.8%, also a very strong number, and you find yourselves at 0.4%. So once again, town's in a good position. Its debt is very modest. It has the ability to incorporate new indebtedness and not, in effect, upset the apple cart. Page 20, debt service versus expenditures. This is a nice way of saying, of your credit card, how many pennies or what percentage of your pennies in your credit card go to debt service. So if you think about it, the peer average is almost 6%. 6 cents on every dollar on the peers go to debt service. You're at 4%. So less than a nickel, less than 1/20 of your budget goes to debt service. That's important because, again, it gives you that ability, if you so choose, to incorporate some new debt. By the way, you'll notice a Blacksburg, a Leesburg, they find themselves considerably over 8%. Anything under about 12% we consider a very solid number. Again, also depends on the size of the community, so one size doesn't fit all. Leesburg, for example, has a policy that it won't go above 15%, okay, and it's still AAA. So I always get away from, when we look at things, putting 1% and then having, meaning a percentage, and having it done uniformly. That's not how we do this as your advisor, but just to give you a sense of that. Okay, page 21 though, I said earlier, unassigned fund balance, minimum of $5 million. As a percentage of revenues, the peer group is a little over 50%. You're at 39%. We would like to see this be the floor, not the ceiling, but the floor. Because again, you look at some other folks, and they are larger than you, the average is larger than you. Alta Vista, in a very, very good position, has 120%. That's right. So if their annual budget, just go with me for a minute, is $10 million, that means they have $12 million of unassigned fund balance. Very strong. It's one of the reasons they've been able to avoid having to borrow money, is because they have so much cash flow. Again, we work with all of these people at any given time, so we know a little bit about any of them. They're in a unique position. But again, most tend to be a medium, a combination of things. So again, you're solid, but not spectacular, and we'd like to make sure you stay at your policy.
And we have a policy.
You have a policy. A policy is $5 million or greater. And again, you are just at the cusp of that, Mayor, and we'd like to make sure that we do nothing to erode that policy going forward. So, I'm now on to the next area about the Meadows project. So, we indicate here on page 22 that as financial advisor to the town, we've been asked to review potential cash flow impacts of this project. We have met over time with the staff, Food City representatives, to discuss the project and the overall sports complex and the 40 acres, etc. What we've provided you here, again, is some initial cash flows. We are not here to tell you it's a good project, it's a bad project, the cash flows work or do not work in terms of what we expect. We're going to show you what they look like based upon the numbers provided to us. So, page 23, one important point here, and that is we have in green all parcels have either letters of intent or contracts in place, and they're all new businesses. I understand that may be a little bit too bold of a statement that we've made. Basically, not everything is under contract or letter of intent. I would leave that again to your staff or some other folks in the audience if you would like them to clarify. But we understand they've made great progress, and so what we've got here is using this information these assumptions, I will tell you, based upon these assumptions, we're looking at having a build-out, something akin to about $1.4 million or $1.5 million of revenues to the town, net new revenues to the town. That's an important number, because what we have done with that number is we have haircutted that number. We've shown it to you if it's exactly as expected. We've shown it to you if it's 75% of expected, and we've shown if it's half as well as expected. Now, I would add, when we met with the rating agencies, we actually talked to them and showed them a case and based everything on 65% of revenues. So we cut the revenues down by 1/3, not because we think that's the case, but because we know the rating folks like to look at things with the haircut. That's how they do their analysis. Page 24. So what are we looking at here? The essence of it all is that we understand preliminarily that when you factor in some shares of dollars, road improvements, what have you, we're looking at potentially, that's the key word, a $10 million borrowing that the town would be responsible for. Now, make note of that. That will not most likely be the final exact amount that's borrowed, but we've used that preliminarily for all of this. So we've said if we need roughly $10 million of what we'll call proceeds, that may require a borrowing of $10.5 million, but we've assumed it's going to be around $10 million. So, what happens? Page 25. Its project, as we said, is anticipated to generate revenues for the town amongst the following: real estate taxes, meals tax, lodging taxes. Additional revenues may be generated from sales tax, personal property tax, B-poll taxes. Sales tax revenues are shared with the county and other towns, and they're less significant than the others above. We've not factored in any of those. And we've also not assumed that there's any revenues from the sports complex. So we've tried to use direct revenues and then haircut them. Again, if you'd like us to change that, all you have to do, go through the town manager, we ask you, we'll change them accordingly and let y'all see what we've got.
So you have not factored in any personal property tax
Yeah.
from any of these new proposed businesses, and you have not factored in any of the B-poll taxes.
No,
Thank
we've
you.
not. So, page 26. As we say, the amount of net new revenue is difficult to project. Absorption, project mix, still uncertain. Things have to occur. But what we can do, as we said earlier, is to take the revenues, show them if they came in, show them if they're haircutted, and that's exactly what we've done, and you'll see that in a moment. So on page 27, this is the cases. There are 3 cases. Case 1, most optimistic, comes in at 100%. Case 2 at 75%. Case 3 at 50%. All assume that we go to the marketplace this summer, that the interest rate is a fixed rate of 4.25%, and we've amortized it. That means we've paid it off over 20 years after the first 2 years of construction, or primarily construction, of interest only. So essentially, a bond issue that's fixed for 22 years with a 20-year amortization. That's what we've done. Does it have to be that way? No. Interest rate at 4.25%, I will tell you today, that's above the market by about 1%. Meaning, if we were entering the market today with your credit rating, we would probably be closer to 3%. But again, markets have a way of moving very quickly, and so we just try to build in a little bit of cushion for everybody's benefit. So, go to page 28, and I promise I'm almost done with my presentation. 100% of total revenues, what you see here is on the left-hand side is the cash flows. I think the right-hand side, graphically, it's the easiest to follow. That brown is the actual debt service. That debt service is roughly $425,000 for the first couple of years. It's interest only, and that makes sense if you think about it. An interest rate of 4.25 on $10,425,000. Then we amortize that $10 million over the next 20 years, level, it's about $750,000 a year. However, under this particular scenario, the build-out would take a couple, 3 years, we're understood, and you end up getting to revenues that are basically in the 1.4 to 1.5 level. So all that difference, that divide, if you would, between the brown and the green is dollars that would inure to the town every year, if it works as expected or as planned. But life doesn't usually work that way. So, go to page 29. We say to ourselves, all things being equal, but if we have 75% of those revenues at build out, you can still see a very healthy cushion. And on the far right-hand side, that surplus is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars every year at 75% of revenues. Then, let's go to 50%. This is if the project is way off. I think this is important. It wasn't by design. It's the way we look at things. What we find is that if the project is way off, we basically are still break even. You look at that, the surplus and the deficits on the right-hand side. You have some deficits in the early years, and then you basically have some surpluses, even at 50% of revenues. And again, that's with us calculating the overall financing being done above the current market rates. So, what to take from all of this? I think what to take from all of this, and this is my last page, is that this project has the potential, if we're even close to being correct on the revenues, of being a net win for the town. If we are not close to revenues, if we're way off, if we're 50% off, then under this approach, the town would still be looking at very few, if any, dollars coming out of pocket to take care of this project. Obviously, if we're even further off, let's say we're at 25% of revenues. Hard to imagine that. Then we probably are going to be looking at a couple $100,000 that'll be coming from the town. But to a large extent, when the rating agencies looked at this, and we look at this, even if we're at 50% of expected revenues over time, by and large, these revenues pay for the debt service. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, Madam Mayor, members of council. I hope that was not too long, and appreciate your comments, Councilman Humphries. Thank you.
Do we have any questions?
Yeah, I've got some. Kathy, I have several questions. Do you mind if
Sure, go ahead.
take a few minutes?
I do too, as well. You want me to go first?
Whatever.
Thank you for that information that you gave us. We appreciate you coming tonight and helping us with this to understand what all you all have done with this analysis. What was the purpose of your financial analysis?
I'm sorry.
What was the purpose of your financial analysis?
Well, as I said early on, so our purpose, and we do this with your neighbors, we do this with yourselves over the years, is to, as I said, let you see where the town is, give you a comprehensive financial review, as we said, so that you can understand where the town is as you move forward and make deliberations on any number of projects, just your overall budget, your financial policies. So again, the Meadows project that we showed at the end here is just one element of the overall looking at the town for you. So this is something we typically do. Councilman Patterson, I have done this in previous years when you've had retreats. I've been here, again, to educate you and your colleagues and the citizens on how the town looks, how it shakes out, and what it should be careful of, or what it should be comforted by. That's what we do.
And does that convince the bonding company to offer bonds or help the town to make a decision on selling the bonds?
I leave it to you. That's your call. That's why we give it to you, so you can decide how you feel about that. That's not for me, it's for you.
Okay. And does your company make money on the bond sale?
We make money on the bond sale as your advisor. We make money whether or not you issue bonds or not. We are basically indifferent to that. We are not the persons, let me make it clear, we are not the folks that sell your bonds. Otherwise that'd be a conflict. We don't do that, no.
And I believe based on what we went over, and correct me if I'm wrong, the information came from, well, I guess I better ask you, where did this information come from that was used to make the revenue projections?
Very good question. The town provided that to us. In turn, that was given to us through a combination of the folks that are the developers working with the treasurer's office to make sure that that's right. So we, as I said earlier, may make it clear, these are not our numbers. They're numbers that we use that y'all have given to us.
Thank you. And the proposed development shows 2 new hotels. We already have one in town that just opened up on Exit 19, and another that's proposed to be built on our agenda tonight. The demand for hotel space in Abingdon is not unlimited. More hotels may simply, possibly rob from existing hotels. Did Davenport take this into account in making the revenue projections for income for meals and lodging taxes?
Okay.
In other words, are your projections gross or net? And did we not talk about net? But
Well, as I said earlier, we don't do the projections. But having said that, you just saw we take the revenue projections given to us, and then we have them. So we basically took them and divided them in half. That's why you saw case 3, which is the 50% case.
and the interest rate on the bonds, what did you use for the analysis?
I just gave it to you.
Which
4
one?
and a quarter.
Okay, 4 1/4. Okay. I think that's all the questions I have.
Okay, thank you, Council.
Mr. Rose, is it my turn, Mayor?
It is.
Mr. Rose, I thank you for coming here. I am the demon who caused you to be here, and you can take my, I hope you take my questions in the right spirit, and I'm opposed to the Meadows project, always have been, and I've openly admit that, but we get along with that, and so my questions are going to be coming from, to make sure that this project benefits the town. I asked for this because the Falls project in Bristol, and I understand that you're involved in that, and you may not want to share this with me, and I understand that. But if you can, to help me, I would appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
The Falls project in Bristol has caused them to be put in a very, very difficult position financially, as you well know. I believe I read in the newspaper that they asked for you to help them restructure their debt, and I looked at those choices, and I do not want me or any of my predecessors to be in that position, so that's where I'm coming from. Is it fair for me to ask you why that happened?
Yes, sir. I think it's very fair. Well, let me start by saying again, and the same thing with Bristol. I've worked with Bristol for years. I've worked with Washington County, and I've worked with the town. As you well know, no secret, the city and the county suit each other. We stay out of all that politics. So the point is, what we try to do, if you remember the old days when there was the old show Dragnet, Sergeant Friday, he just said, just a fax man. That's what we try to provide. So to add to Councilman Patterson's question about revenue estimates, same thing in Bristol. The reason we're still working there, I believe, is that we don't do revenue estimating. That's not what we do. Haven't done it. We're not doing it here. And I think I made that clear. We take the numbers that staff will give us. We then haircut it, discount it. That's how we do it. So to get back to your point, about Bristol. Bristol's situation, I think, is a unique one. It's an unfortunate situation, but when, this is my opinion, right or wrong, when Bristol got going, the city on the Virginia side, they ended up having roughly an 18-month period when everything stopped, when the county and the town and the city, county and the city, ended up in a lawsuit. Do you recall that?
No, I don't.
Okay.
The county and the city?
Yes, the county and the city.
No, I don't know.
Okay, well, the county and the city were in a public lawsuit. At that point, the city of Bristol, Tennessee, basically got 18 free months to sign up people for their project across the border, and they never looked back. That was a big hit, in my opinion, having said that. So that's one factor. I think the second factor is, if you look at the way the Falls project was set up, it is supposed to reach its finality with regard to the second and third phases in and around the end of 2020. Well, it's still 2017, almost 2018. That project still has 2 to 3 years left of what's supposed to be new build-out that's coming. The fact is, some folks are feeling it's just way behind, and it may be, but I have no sense of that other than I just know that there's still 2 plus 3 years left before the first chapter is really written, and that is, what does it really look like, those revenues? Just like here, if you look at the revenues, the build-out is expected to be over 3 years. Not over 3 months, meaning the build-out, meaning new entities coming on board are not all coming at the same time. That's not how these numbers are estimated. Same thing held true for the folks over at the Falls project. But having said that, there's no doubt that it's moving slow. There's no doubt that, again, those revenues are low relative to perhaps what the projections were. And so again, they are being proactive in terms of looking at taking out those notes. And so to take it one step further, what was done, the strategy that was done for the Falls project was recognizing that they had roughly, which they have, $50 million that they invested. We borrowed those monies in the form of what we call notes, short-term over basically 4 to 5 years. And then they get taken out permanently once the project is built out. That was the plan. Well, the project hasn't yet hit build out, but interest rates are very favorable right now. And on top of that, the city has been demonstrating a balanced budget. Some people not realizing that, but the city has. And in fact, they even got a favorable rating outlook the last time they interacted, because the city this particular year is no longer doing what we call short-term borrowing to pay their bills. They were doing that to a large extent for a number of years, and we pointed that out, irrespective of the Falls project. So my point in a long-winded way of saying is that while the overall finances of the city are still, again, not easy, they are better than they've been the last couple of years. Interest rates has been very low, so we're now taking out, that was the decision, to permanently finance all $50 million.
Well, I read in the newspaper that they were faced with devastating, the choices that you gave them, they were faced with devastating tax increases or cuts to essential services. Is that not true?
That is true, depending upon how they'd structured taking out the $50 million. Because what they wanted to do is to assume that there would be no new revenues coming in from the Falls project. That's the way they want to look at this. So to their credit, they're looking at this from the most conservative way possible. That's how they're looking at it.
And they're they are the developer, right?
You know, I'm not sure I would say I know, again, because we're not, I'm not sure I know what the right technical term of that is. I think the folks that they were using, maybe still using, it's a part I don't get involved in, Interstate, at one point were technically not the developer, but they were like a consultant. They may be with someone else now. I don't really know, Mayor. That's not my world. But the point is, again, they want to their credit, say, what if there are effectively no revenues coming in? How do we meet all this? And the one last thing, Mr. Craig, is this. The other thing that I should have pointed out that happened was it was expected at the get-go that the indebtedness they would incur was going to be $25 million. That was what initially was the number. And then it grew to 50. That's not my world, but that was a very sore point, still is, because again, whoever estimated that did what they did.
So you're confirming what that, a council member that I talked with down there told me that the revenue projections were way off and there was cost overruns. Is that?
I would say this, the cost, I'll call it overrun, is twice the level that was initially planned.
So,
And the revenue estimates appear to be on a lower trajectory, but they're not done yet. That's in fairness. They're not
I
done
asked him for advice, and in our situation, I'm very concerned because, in fact, I gave a report to the town council on this. I'm very concerned about projections made in the climate that we're living in right now. And we know that retail is changing rapidly, away from big box type development, which we have here. We know that, or at least I think I know, and I don't know if you know this or not, probably not fair to ask you, but there are indications that we're overbuilt already in the area that we're living in with retail. So I'm wondering if we're looking at revenues through rose-colored glasses, and I know you've made it very clear that you're using information that we've given, that that you were furnished. Well, you know, the town wants to do this project, and I understand that. I'm not saying that anybody skewed any revenue projections. I know Food City needs to go to the bank and borrow money, I guess. I know they're a wealthy company, but most people borrow money. So their projections might be optimistic. He indicated to me, I asked him for advice, he indicated to me that he would not vote for anything that was almost ironclad because we're taking on that risk along with the developer. And he suggested that we look at some type of independent analysis that takes into account the thing that Cindy was talking about, where the new development just simply robs from existing revenue sources that we already have, and in fact, that's not new revenue. Is there such a study that could be done?
Yes, sir, there is. We don't do those studies. Even if we weren't working with you, that's not our world. So I do no revenue projections. My firm does none for anybody, whether it's a client or not, okay? But there are firms out there. We could furnish names. We get no compensation or anything like that. I could just say, all right, let me get you some names of folks if you so desire. We could do that. But again, I think just like this is really no different, and let me say it the right way, than early on in Bristol looking at something. Again, we use an assumption it's 10 million. We use an assumption of revenues given to us. We show you what it might be. And again, as long, and I think you appreciate it, so you asked again, Councilman Patterson, my goal here is to give you a framework of reference from which you start. Here's the way to think about this, if you want to, from a worst case basis. Worst case basis. You have roughly $750,000 would be your debt service, as I said earlier, on this project. And if there were no revenues to come into that, you have a $750,000 hurdle. Again, if there are no revenues, all right? Having said that, your debt service today is about $525,000. When it would be, in effect, layered in, your debt service would drop down. By the time that $750,000 is, in effect, payable, your debt service will have come down by about $115,000. So let me make it simple. Let me round off, use it. Your burden, if this project were just a complete washout and nothing, no new revenues, it's a $600,000 potential burden. Okay?
Yes, and that's my concern.
Right, I get it.
I realize completely that we're going to gain some revenue if they build anything. I understand that. That you pointed out in your analysis that our real estate tax rate is amongst the highest of our peers.
Yes, sir.
That concerns me greatly, that we don't end up in the position that Bristol ends up where we have to raise real estate taxes, because although the asset figures you gave us are really good, assets per capita is really good, there are people in this town that own houses and are paying real estate taxes that don't have enough to eat. I mean, I know that. So I'm very concerned about being put in a position where I have to vote to raise real estate taxes or leave my predecessors in that position. So bottom line is
Like I
that
said,
the council
that's-
member.
At the end of the day, and I appreciate, Mr. Craig, I think you've been very eloquent about raising your concerns. We've tried just to give you some numbers. And I think that's really why, at the end of the day, hopefully you feel like, again, my message is one that is supposed to be, as I said earlier, Councilman Patterson, just information, factual information. I stay out of, is it a good project? Is it a bad project? Should you move forward? Should you not? The five of you will have to decide that.
Yes, I understand.
And that's all.
Forgive
That's all I
me
can
for
do. No,
forgiving
it's
me
fine.
for that.
But I appreciate it. And that's the same thing in Bristol that we told the same folks. At 25 million, this is what the impact would be if nothing new occurred. Then it hit to 50 million, that's their decision, that's what it looks like. That's
Okay.
right.
One more thing, and
Yes, sir.
then I'm done. Would you consider sending Mr. Kelly a list of those firms that do that type of study?
If y'all would like us to do that, if that's the decision of the way we operate, I'll just tell you, for all of our clients, we require, so we stay out of one council member versus another.
Yes.
We basically say that we will take the direction from you as a collective unit basically through the city manager or the town manager or the county manager, whatever the case may be. So in this case, so if y'all decide and Mr. Kelly asks us, we'll pull together a list of those folks and we'll provide it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rose, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Rose.
Let me ask you, so you said that our current debt service right now is 525, and that's expected to be paid off before the other debt service comes on?
No, what I meant was, Mayor, is that about 115,000 of that will be paid off within the next couple of years.
Okay.
Then about 3 or 4 years later, another couple $100,000 will be paid off, and then by 10 years, all of that debt will be paid off. That's existing debt. All of that will be debt. Short of you doing something new I don't know about.
And if I'm wrong, correct me, but I wasn't under the assumption that someone else developed that for Bristol, even though you might not call them the developer. They're the ones that assume the development costs, and sewer and water and all the stuff that they put in there. They basically developed that property themselves, did they not?
Essentially, yes, sir.
And we're not developing this property ourselves. Food City is developing this property.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
Well, I guess one other.
Go ahead.
If you have revenues, say your revenues, you come with the revenue projections that you have for I'm talking about tax revenue.
Yes, sir.
And your town expenses exceed that. Well, just normally, just like, pay increases or equipment costs or all that stuff.
Right.
do you, you have to make up that revenue somewhere, so it is important to have some tax revenue, additional tax revenue generated from someplace, is it not?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate you coming down, David.
Thank you. Enjoyed coming in. Merry Christmas.
Thank you again, Mr. Rhodes.
Safe travels, David.
See you.
See you.
Okay, we are down to petitions, public hearings, and first reading of ordinances. First reading of the proposed rezoning, applicant Marathon Realty Corporation, applicant to rezone property, namely tax map number 105A-2-16, consisting of 510 Cummings Street, 534 Cummings Street, 546 Cummings Street, 550 Cummings Street, 562 Cummings Street, and a portion of 575 Cummings Street, consisting of approximately 4.89 acres or 212,833 square feet, more or less, from AFOS, Agriculture, Forestal, and Open Space District to B2 General Business District, Stephen Spangler, Marathon Realty.
This is the Stephen Spangler Marathon Realty. This is the Washington Crossing Shopping Center we acquired in 2015. None of our due diligence items that we got during the acquisition or since then showed that this was a split zone piece of property. But looking at some other things on GIS, we did notice that in the town's database it was split zone. We investigated with town staff and determined that that was the case. So this rezoning is simply just to clean up that property. It's been taxed commercial. It's been utilized commercial for 30 years.
Okay.
We're not asking for any additional property to be rezoned. It's simply a housekeeping matter.
Okay. Now, Mr. Kelly, do you have anything to say?
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of council, I will say that when this development was built, it was not in the town limits of the town of Abingdon, so the zoning was what was in existence in Washington County at the time, and it was just something that I presume once the annexation took place in 87 or 88 that it never got picked up and the zoning changed. It would be grandfathered because it's been put to that use and has not gone absent of that use for a period of 2 years, so it would be grandfathered anyway. And as Mr. Spangler said, they've been paying the taxes at commercial. This is not in land use or anything like that, so it's just a matter of cleaning it up on the zoning maps and making sure that Marathon has a full tract of property that's zoned B2.
And so this is a first reading and not a public hearing?
It is a public hearing.
Okay.
And I'd like to have some further comments after the conclusion of the public hearing.
Okay, so I will declare that we are opening the public hearing. Would anyone like to speak about this matter? Again, would anyone like to speak about the proposed rezoning? Applicant Marathon Realty Corporation. And for the third and final time, would anyone like to speak about the rezoning? Applicant Marathon Realty Corporation. Okay, hearing none, I will close the public hearing, and now
Our town planner might want to weigh in on that too, because it was a town planning meeting that sent that to us,
I
sent that
think
to
we'll
here.
close the public hearing and then call for discussion.
Oh, that's great.
Right. So Mr. Kelly would like to say something first.
Yes, and I was going to allude to that fact, but Jason Boswell is here from the Planning Department, but this was unanimously recommended by the Planning Commission. Is that correct, Mr. Boswell? And I would also point out that in light of the fact that this has been this way for 30 years, this is not only a public hearing but a first reading. I would recommend that the council dispense with the second reading of the ordinance so that it can take effect 30 days from today.
Okay. Do you have anything you would like to say, Mr. Boswell?
I agree with Gary.
Okay. So your recommendation is to approve the proposed rezoning on the first reading. Is that correct?
And dispense with the second.
And dispense with the second. Council, do I have a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we approve on first reading the proposed rezone and dispense with the second reading.
Okay.
I second.
So we have a motion by Mr. Howard and a second by Mr. Craig. Any further discussion?
Just to clarify, Mayor, Mayor, and citizens of Abingdon and visitors, this was in the paper, I'm assuming twice. And just, thank you. And this is just housekeeping. As Mr. Kelly and Mr. Spangler said, the taxes have been paid as commercial, so just a housekeeping.
Okay. All right, roll call, please.
Mr. Craig?
Aye.
Ms. Patterson?
Aye.
Mr. Howard?
Aye.
Mr. Humphries?
Aye.
And Mayor Lo?
Aye. Thank you. Okay, we're down to the second public
Wait
hearing.
a second, did that motion also dispense with the second reading?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, we're down to the second public hearing. And this is a public hearing regarding proposed offer to purchase a right-of-way for the South Abingdon Extension Transmission Line from Appalachian Power Company, a Virginia corporation, on property known as Wolf Creek Water Reclamation Facility, located at 21436 Vance's Mill Road, tax map number 125-2-6, consisting of 1/10 of an acre, more or less. Would you like to speak first, or would you like for me to do the public
If the
hearing?
power company folks would like to come up, that would be fine.
Okay.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Derek Wilson. I'm the right-of-way supervisor for Inward Energy. We're a contractor for representing American Electric Power. They're proposing to build a new transmission line that runs from their existing transmission, Saltville-Kingsport transmission. Let me see this. From an existing transmission line. Saltville-Kingsport transmission line to their existing South Abingdon station. The purpose of the line is just to help increase the reliability in the area and to help prevent future outages. In doing so, they're crossing a portion of property owned by the city. It was purchased in March of 1936. So it's a small, I think it's like approximately 2-acre tract. And we're barely clipping the eastern boundary of that. They're at this point, it's overhang only. The center line does not cross that portion of property. The proposed right-of-way is 100 feet in width. We're only crossing it with a small section of overhang in one of those 50-foot offsets. There's no structures on the property. There's no proposed access on the property. It'll just be only work that'll be performed on the property, be tree clearing only.
Okay.
Back in May, I think my agent, Mark Draper, met with you, Madam Mayor, and I think in October he met with you, Mr. Kelly, in regards to the proposed easement. I think he dropped off the easement for you guys to review. And I think our initial offer was $874. Those are based on comparable sales of property similar to that selling in the area.
made that initial offer. While we waited for an appraisal to be done, that appraisal came back at $650 approximately. So we're sticking to our initial offer of what the $874.
You said 2 acres.
That was the surface parcel in the deed.
That's how much property in total the town owns, but they're
Right.
going,
That is not the part that goes over, the trail, is it the Evermont Victory Trail?
No, this is on the opposite side of the road. It's property we actually didn't know, or I didn't know that we owned. It's on the other side of the creek, on the other side of the road.
okay, Mr. Kelly, would you like to make any more comments about this?
No, I think it's a fair offer in terms of the cost for the project. It will not, the town does not have any use for this property that would be impacted by this. So my recommendation is that the town council authorize me, after the public hearing, that town council authorize me to execute a document accepting the easement by Appalachian Power Company.
One other thing I would like to mention, portion of this is above ground, and then a smaller portion of it is underground. The underground portion will be crossing some streets that are, I think they were in the state road system, but now they've been turned over to the city for maintenance. Those roads would be Main Street, Route 11. It would be Old Jonesboro Road and Jonesboro Road. What is the process, and what do we need to do to get the process rolling and getting the permits to cross under those sections with the underground?
Why don't we take care of one thing at a time? Take care of one thing at a
Yeah,
time.
let's-
Yeah, this doesn't relate to this
Yeah.
particular easement.
Okay.
Right, so let me do the public hearing about the easement, if you
Okay.
don't mind, okay? Okay, so the public hearing is open. Would anyone like to speak about the town of Abingdon selling 1/10 of an acre to Appalachian Power Company for their new, is that called the East Transmission? South Abingdon Extension Transmission Line. Again, would anyone like to come forward and speak about the Abingdon Extension, South Abingdon Extension Transmission Line from Appalachian Power Company? And finally, would anyone like to speak about the South Abingdon Extension Transmission Line from Appalachian Power Company? Sale of the property is 1/10 of an acre, more or less, for $874. Okay, hearing none, I will close the public hearing. And, council, what's your pleasure? This is, just to be clear, this is a recommendation by the town manager to sell that strip of land.
It's just an easement,
I
Madam
mean,
Mayor.
I'm sorry, to sell an easement to Appalachian Power Company.
This is for the right-of-way, correct? Is that, yeah, for number 2, okay.
I'll make a motion to approve it as presented. Sell this 1/10 of an acre to the power company.
Okay,
And authorize me to,
Authorize town manager to
accept
do any
Execute.
documents that need to be done.
Yep.
Execute.
thank you.
And I'll second that.
okay. Any more discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Craig?
Aye.
Ms. Patterson?
Aye.
Mr. Howard?
Aye.
Mr. Humphries?
Aye.
Mayor Lo?
Aye. Now, Mr. Kelly, I'm assuming to answer the gentleman's question, he just needs to contact management, and you all need to look at all of the proposals and
Yeah, and the subject has already been broached upon with Mr. Bolick and me about how to approach that, so we just need to line up a meeting and get the right people around the table, and we'll talk about those things. So point of contact would be Matt Bolick to set that up.
Okay. So number 3, public hearing regarding proposed drainage easement to Appalachian Power Company of Virginia Corporation on property known as Wolf Creek Water Reclamation Facility located at 21436 Vances Mill Road, tax map number 125-2-6, consisting of a strip of land 20 feet in width, 0.036 acres, 1,582 square feet, more or less, known as Easement Area A, and 0.156 acres, 6,800 square feet, more or less, known as Easement Area B. Mr. Kelly?
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of council, this again is another necessary easement for the power company with this project. It is simply a drainage easement, and so will not be, there will not be any structures, as I understand it, that would be placed in the easement area. It consists of about twice the size of the property, so in negotiating the price for that easement was increased proportionate to the amount of land that was being taken, and I don't have that number. Deb, do you have the number of the consideration in front of you?
$1,749.20.
Yes. And so it would be my recommendation at the conclusion of public hearing that the town council authorize me to accept this easement for their project of expansion of their power lines in that area. And again,
Is it on the
it's
same piece of property?
no, it's actually
on the
it's on the
plant.
treatment plant property.
Is it on the Mountain Victory Trail?
No.
It's down next to EQ Basin, if I understand it correctly.
Yeah.
Greg, just for information, why does a power line need a drainage easement? I haven't been able to figure that out.
I'm going to have to defer to the experts out here that are building the power line.
It's part of the storm maintenance water plans that we're required to do with their station sites in different areas. So to have the specific runoff to get to.
Oh, this involves a station?
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
that's
it's part of the
okay.
station project.
Okay.
So it's for the natural drainage.
Okay, I didn't realize you had a station.
Okay, I'm going to declare the public hearing open. Would anyone like to speak about the proposed drainage easement to Appalachian Power Company on property known as Wolf Creek Water Reclamation Facility and the price of $1749.20? Again, would anyone like to speak about the proposed drainage easement to Appalachian Power Company? And the third and final offer, would anyone like to speak regarding the drainage easement to Appalachian Power Company? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing. Council, what's your pleasure?
Mayor, well, I move to go ahead and approve this and allow Mr. Kelly to sign the necessary documents for this drainage easement.
And you approve the price of $1749.20?
Yes.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Any more discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Craig?
Aye.
Ms. Patterson?
Aye.
Mr. Howard?
Aye.
Mr. Humphries?
Aye.
Mayor Lo?
Aye. Okay, we're down to public hearing regarding Abingdon Property Invest LLC, request for a special use permit pursuant to the zoning ordinance section 15-9 flood zone special uses to operate an adult home, tax map number 006-6-576 Walden Road. Jason Boswell, and I see Mr. Matthew Bundy, so I will welcome you to the podium.
Thank you. My name is Matthew Bundy with Bundy Architecture and Engineering. project we did some work on a few years ago and are now we're actually coming back because a corner of the building clips the 100-year flood plain, and so then we need a special use permit to do the construction there. What they're proposing is a 52-bed adult home. It's going to be very top-notch. The same owners, or operators at least, own the Grace Healthcare across the street, so they'll be able to work together to some degree. As far as we're filling in some to get the front of the building up out of the floodplain, then we're leaving that whole bottom untouched like it is, and there's some existing pipes that are there that we'll be taking out and putting in bigger pipes to get a bridge across for the access for the driveway, and all parking will be pretty far removed from Walden Road, so I don't think there'll be any issues, anybody parking on Walden Road.
Okay. Mr. Boswell, would you like to add anything as far as planning commission notes?
I'll add briefly that the, on November 27th planning commission meeting, it was unanimously approved to accept the special use permit for the construction of the flood district. Planning department's recommendation and the planning commission's recommendation to approve the special use with the condition that the flood study be performed and submitted to the town before construction's complete, or started rather.
Okay.
Mr. Boswell, I think that also this had been on the Planning Commission agenda about a year ago, is that correct?
2015.
2015, and time has just lapsed, and we discovered the need for the...
Yes, originally it was missed, that it needed a special use permit.
But also it opens that door up again to ask questions. And one of the questions is, when this came up before, I think part of it came up was in conjunction with the barn, and the barn, the revitalization and use of the barn into a community type center. That was actually going to be phase 1, and then phase 2 is actually the building of the complex. Tell me, I guess one of the things I'd like to know is why they didn't do phase 1 first to do the barn, and second of all, they plan to do the barn.
Yeah, I can try to address that. My memory of it is that they're definitely keeping the barn, they're preserving it. That they want to down the road do a community type center in there, or I guess agricultural space or whatever they can do. They haven't done any drawings or done any detailed code study or anything like that. We did show access to it at some point where when we came through last time to show putting a parking lot or something down there for that. But as far as, I don't know why that they decided not to do it, but I do know that they're adamant about preserving it.
Well, I know we had 2 people that came and spoke to us at the meeting, a couple right across the street, the Moores, and they wanted to make sure the barn was kept. I do know that, when we were doing this, that was an integral part of why the Plan Commission back in 2015 approved this, was because that they said there was going to be a community center tied with that. All the Planning Commission was, and I just asked Jason if he would look up and see if somebody submitted plans at that time, or because it was drawings that we received at that time for something. So.
However, they didn't submit plans for the barn to the Planning Commission on November 27th, correct?
No. This was they opened the door again, so they allowed me to ask the questions since that door was open again, which I wouldn't have been able to ask normally.
Okay. I declare the public hearing is open. This public hearing is regarding Abingdon Property Invest LLC request for special use permit pursuant to the Town Zoning Ordinance, Section 15.9, flood zone special uses to operate an adult home. Would anyone like to speak about this matter? Would anyone like to speak about the request by Abingdon Property Invest for a special use permit for pursuant to the zoning ordinance for the flood zone special uses? And again, would anyone like to speak about the Abingdon Property Invest request rezoning? Okay. Hearing none. Council, what's your pleasure?
Mayor, I move that we accept the recommendation of the Planning Commission and approve the special use permit for the Abingdon Property Investment LLC.
Madam Mayor,
Second.
Madam Mayor, may I say something? This is another one of those examples that it was approved once upon a time. I would recommend dispensing with the second reading of the special use permit, if Mr. Craig's in agreement to do that.
And dispense with the second reading as part of my motion.
Okay.
And I second that.
Okay, now does that include the flood, requirement of the flood study that was recommended, or is that already?
I think they've already done the flood study, just haven't been submitted in the town.
Okay.
That was definitely part of our package of getting approval for the town.
They still have to come back to the planning commission.
Okay, okay.
Is that the, go ahead with the motion, then we'll have a discussion.
We have a motion. and a second.
Okay, so the, and as we were talking, Matt, Scott Wilson broached the question about whether or not and what was the number on that study?
As far as the 100-year flood study?
Well,
or
it was
the
a
graphs?
M16, or I don't know what it was, another study. Would that have to, is that gonna have to be done, or?
Oh, like a map of, a map revision?
Yes.
The study shows no rise
Okay.
in the floodplain, so we're allowed to have 1 foot of rise before we'd have to do a layer of map revision. So, they haven't reviewed it yet, so we'll get their feedback and make sure everything's okay, but that's what I'm showing now, and,
But you talked about also adding a little bit, bringing that up just a tad anyway.
yeah,
And that would
we're
get it-
bringing our part up. That's not in the part where the water really flows, just the
Right.
fringe where it ponds more, so it doesn't have an effect really on the flow of the water through.
Right. And
And taking those pipes out helps a lot too.
Right, has Matt Bolick looked at that also yet, have you?
He has not.
Yeah, okay.
I think Tyler may have looked at it in 2015, but I know that we've got to resubmit it, so.
Okay, very good.
Okay, any more discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Craig?
Aye.
Ms. Patterson?
Aye.
Mr. Howard?
Aye.
Mr. Humphries?
Aye.
Mayor Lo?
Aye. Okay, we are down to the public hearing regarding consideration of transfer of franchise agreement renewal for cable television franchise per existing agreement with Bristol, Virginia Utilities. Deborah Eisenhower is here to tell us about that.
In accordance with sections 4.5, but the majority of which is in 4.6 of the present franchise document, BVU requests that we transfer our interest in the BVU non-exclusive franchise at the same terms as set forth in sections 4.6 to Sunset Fiber LLC, a Virginia limited liability company pursuant to the agreement of two companies that the two companies have worked out. And I would ask Mr. Joseph Puckett if he would join me here. And continue to say, accordingly, Sunset Fiber will have and hold all rights and interests and perform all duties and responsibilities that are agreed to in the standing franchise with BVU. And the Cable Communications Policy Act of 1984 and the Cable Television Consumer Protection and Competition Act of 92, and then the Telecommunications Act of 1996 allow for most of the controls of this type of matter. The town receives gross revenues on an annual basis, and BVU is current with the payment of same. The town of Abingdon is the franchising authority under this agreement, and BVU or Sunset Fiber will become the grantee. Closing should occur within a week or so.
We're efforting, Mr. Craig, as Mr. Craig well knows, as a representative on BVU, that's in process.
We'll probably need some comment from Mr. Craig. At this point, the legal department would recommend authorizing the town manager to execute and transfer said assignment as given as a benefit under the standing franchise.
Okay.
Any questions you might have would be for
I'm glad to answer anything I can.
Mr. Puckett?
How much of those fees we receive each year?
I just looked at 5%.
5%.
I think
Which
that
is?
80, the last check was 8,500 range.
It was between
Just
8
got
and
it.
9.
It was about 83.50, I think, somewhere in that neighborhood.
I had to ask too.
Is that normal? Is 5%, is that the going rate, or can it be adjusted upwards or downwards, or?
That's not a bargaining.
Most of those terms are dictated by one of the 3 acts.
One of those 3 acts.
Most of the state code, there's far less moving parts than there used to be, negotiated by localities and those. But Vice Senator's covered everything, and I certainly appreciate her cooperation in Mr. Kelly's office. We've completed this process in Washington County and are working towards the same in Bristol. It's unique because these 3 localities are current TV customers of BVU, whereas post-transaction, Sunset will be expanding TV operations into other localities. So it's important for us to make sure we do the right thing for the existing localities and their constituents. That's why I'm here. It's a pretty benign process, but it's something that's very necessary. And I'd be glad to answer any questions that you all might have.
Okay, so I'm going to declare this public hearing open. And the public hearing is regarding consideration of transfer of franchise agreement renewal for cable television franchise per existing agreement with Bristol, Virginia Utilities. So this is a transfer of the franchise agreement. Would anyone like to speak on behalf of this matter? Again, would anyone like to speak about the consideration of transfer of franchise agreement with BVU? And for the third and final time, would anybody like to speak in regards to the transfer of franchise agreement for BVU? Hearing none, I will close this public hearing, and I will ask council, what is your pleasure?
Mayor, I move that we approve the transfer of the franchise agreement and authorize Mr. Kelly to sign any documents necessary.
Okay.
And I second that.
Okay. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call please.
Mr. Craig?
Aye.
Ms. Patterson?
Aye.
Mr. Howard?
Aye.
Mr. Humphries?
Aye.
Mayor Lowe?
Aye. Okay, we are down to public hearing regarding temporary construction easement and permanent slope easement agreement by and between the Grundy National Bank and the town of Abingdon, located at 490 Cummings Street, tax map 105A-2-16B, consisting of 3,679 square feet, more or less. Deborah C. Eisenhower.
This hearing is pursuant to 15.2/1800 to address the pursuit of an easement to enable initial construction of the road and street work within the town of Abingdon and the improvements on Cummings and Cook Street Extension area. This is 2-part easement, one of which is temporary in that it's an extra 20 feet around the perimeter of the initial 3,679 square feet area in which the work will be done for the slope easement. At the time that the work will be finished and the elements will be entered into use and service for the town, not to exceed 2 years, that's in the wording as well, then the temporary easement will be finished. And the other one, the slope easement, will be perpetual and will continue, and it is to provide for safety, for gradual sloping of the ground and drainage. And you have a copy of that in your, a copy of the draft in your packet. So, let's see. besides providing for drainage and the gradual transition between the two areas, and absolutely providing area for the turn lane. There will be a sidewalk, guardrail, and fencing near the bank parking lot. It will actually be on top of a 6-foot wall. And all these improvements have been approved by Jonathan Lewis, Highlands Engineering, the lead engineer on the road improvement project, VDOT up to this appropriate point, and the town's engineering staff. And the legal department would recommend that council authorize the town manager to execute the document contingent upon any final edits with the company.
Okay. Anything else?
I don't believe so. Do you have questions?
I have one question. Greg, we have an engineer on board that looks at buildability. I suggest that, not a question, a suggestion I have. I suggest that before this is filed, that you run that by AMT.
AMT, yeah, they're our
Because
consultants, so.
This is a steep slope, and they may have come up with something relative to buildability, something else that might be necessary. And I would hate for us to have to go back to Grundy National Bank and make any modifications. We might need to make.
Matt, is that something in their scope that they would do for us? Thank you.
Okay. I declare this public hearing open. Would anyone like to speak in regards to the temporary construction easement and permanent slope easement agreement by and between the Grundy National Bank and the town of Abingdon? Yes, ma'am, please come forward. State your name, please, and your address.
Yes, I'm Nan Harmon, and I'm at 498 Green Spring Road. This is 498 Cummings. Do you all have a map or a drawing of that, or something that I could see?
It's in that packet back there on the table.
Okay, I just wanted to see where it is and what it's about.
It is in that public packet there.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Not an engineer, so I don't know. I just wanted to see, is this along Cummings? Looks like it. Cummings and then turning into Green Spring?
It's only on Cummings.
Only on Cummings?
That portion that we're speaking of tonight.
Would ultimately turn into the realignment.
Oh, okay. I just didn't know where it was. Oh, and the house that, I see this is the house that is off of Green Spring then. Okay, I'll look at it in the packet. Thank you.
Okay. Would anyone else like to speak? Hearing none, I will declare the public hearing closed. Council, what's your pleasure?
I'll move that we accept the temporary construction easement and permanent slope easement between Grundy National Bank and the town of Abingdon located at 498 Cummings Street, tax map number 105A-2-16B, consisting of 3,679 square feet more or less, with the looking at, or the approval, or whatever word we want to use in there, of AMT looking at it for any.
Wayne's suggestion.
Yeah. So I suggest we approve that contingent on AMT agreeing.
Consulting with AMT.
Yeah.
And authorizing me to execute.
And authorizing you to, yes, execute any and all documents.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Any more discussion?
I have a little discussion if I can, Mayor Lowe. Just the thought occurred to me, the traffic analysis, is this a little bit premature to do before the traffic analysis has been, we had the gentleman come in and talk to us about that traffic analysis. Not really remember that.
Mr. Kelly?
As I recall, the traffic analysis discussions that we had is the current road into the realignment of Green Springs Road and Cook Street and into the development that has been already approved by VDOT and funded by VDOT would be built as Phase 1, and then we would look to the traffic study for Phase 2 to see if there was the need for the additional lane to be built, and we would go back to VDOT for additional revenue sharing funds at that time. That's my recollection. I'll leave that to the council to...
Greg, I agree with you on the Cook Street intersection and the additional lane and the 2 turn lanes. I agree with you on that. However, and I've talked with Matt about this, there is a problem with the roundabout, and the study recommends changing that roundabout, and I don't believe that we want to build that roundabout and then modify it. So I don't recall us approving that. It was only the Cook Street intersection, is my recollection.
Well, the actual approval was back 2 years ago when this went before the council and VDOT gave their blessing for what had been presented. My recollection of the Phase 2 was on a dedicated turn lane that would go up into the town center shopping center and would ultimately lead to a retaining wall along Veterans Park.
I agree with you on that, but what I'm talking about, the roundabout right at the development, at the end where Green Spring Road and Cook Street intersect, right in front of the development. The traffic study indicates that that's not adequate.
Well, we're getting 2 different traffic studies commingled here, I think. I mean, we did one back when VDOT approved the project, and that's when the council authorized me at that point in time to move forward.
I agree with that, but I don't see any need to change the turn lane. I agree with that. What I'm pointing out to you is that we have a traffic analysis that hasn't been, the VDOT traffic analysis did not include the sports complex.
Right, and that's why we were going to do the Phase 2 to determine if that traffic generated enough flow to require the 3rd lane.
I'm not talking about
I'm going to have to defer to the rest of the council here on this, but this is my recollection, and again, I'm going back 2 years prior to this council, or not prior to this council, but 2 years ago when this was initially authorized for me to go forward and build the Green Springs Road project.
Well, here's my problem with that. Why do we spend $60-some thousand to do a traffic study if we're not going to follow their recommendations?
Well, I believe that was at your request, and the council authorized it for sure, but
I believe the council thinks that the traffic from the sports complex needs to be considered as part of the development.
once it's built, I agree with you.
Well, if we build the roundabout.
Where's the roundabout at? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Is it on Cummings and Main?
No, Rick, it's where.
It's up in the complex, right?
Right at the
Okay, so
complex.
what does that have to do with the slope? I guess what I'm trying to
Nothing
figure-
as far as
okay,
I'm concerned.
Okay, good, that's all I need, that's all I
Okay,
wanted.
nothing as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, I just wanted to know if there's some
But
slope.
I wanted, Mr. Kelly said something entirely different.
Yeah, and we can discuss that sometime, but I mean, the slope has to do with my motion just had to do with the slope right there.
May I make a suggestion? Could you walk us through exactly, Mr. Kelly, what this is for? I know if there's a slope, do we have any maps that we can put up for the citizens to look at, and so we can show them exactly what we're doing here? So there's clarity, please.
We can present the the engineering maps. I mean, they've been presented time and time again, but they certainly can be presented one more time if that's what you desire.
Well, we have a motion on the floor.
Yeah, but somebody has to call for a question, I can't.
I'll call for the, well, let's see, just ask if there's any more discussion.
So what we are talking about right now is that we've got a motion and a second to approve the easement agreement by and between the Grundy National Bank and the town of Abingdon that was presented in its entirety in the council packet. Tax map number 105A-2-16B, consisting of 3,679 square feet, more or less, and to authorize the town manager to execute all documents and dispense of the second reading. No,
the second
not this
reading.
one, okay.
No second
And to
reading.
execute all documents. Okay. Do we have any more discussion about that issue? Roll call, please.
Mr. Craig?
Aye.
Ms. Patterson? Mr. Howard?
No.
Mr. Humphries?
Aye.
Mayor Lo?
Aye. Okay. Now we're down to public hearing number 7. Public hearing regarding final plat for proposed subdivision of property Premier Hospitality LLC, owner located at 170 Jonesboro Road, consisting of 3.842 acres, more or less, and currently zoned B2, tax map number 104-C256C. Jason Boswell, interim director of planning.
Madam Mayor, Honorable Council, this situation is kind of similar to the Abingdon Invest. It was seen before the Planning Commission several years back and approved and never acted upon. So the owner has again applied to have the final plat subdivision of the property. The Planning Commission unanimously approved the final plat on November 27th with the condition that Premier Hospitality be required to install curb guttering and required drainage facilities, but postpone sidewalk construction until the existing hotel is reconstructed. It is the Planning Department and Planning Commission's recommendation to approve the final plat with the conditions imposed by the Planning Commission.
Okay, any questions? Okay. I declare the public hearing open. This is in regards to the approval of the final plat for the proposed subdivision of property owned by Premier Hospitality, located at 170 Jonesboro Road. Would anyone like to speak? And again, regarding the final plat for proposed subdivision of property Premier Hospitality LLC, located at 170 Jonesboro Road. And finally, would anyone like to speak regarding the final plat for the proposed subdivision of property? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing. And council, what's your pleasure?
Yes, Mayor, I would move that we approve the final plat for subdivision of the property for Premier Hospitality LLC for Mr. Patel, located at 170 Jonesboro Road, consisting of 3.842 acres, more or less, and currently zoned to B2, tax map 104-62-5/6C.
Do I have a second?
Is that 104-C256C?
Oh, it is 6C, pardon me, it is 6C.
Mr. Humphries, would that be subject to the restrictions imposed?
Subject to the restrictions that were recommended by the Planning Commission, which means curb and guttering water, but not sidewalks at this time.
And I'll second that, please.
Okay. Any discussion?
The only discussion is that Mr. Patel is planning on building an additional hotel or having one built. Is that Mr. Patel?
Yes.
Yes, and so, because I think the plans are very nice, and so you might want just to speak to them just for a second.
Samir Patel, 170 Jonesboro Road, Abingdon, Virginia. Yeah, I own two hotels on that exit, Comfort Inn and Comfort Suites. And with current market, I think there is a need, or I can absorb one more hotel on that exit with developments coming on. And this is going to be one of the unique hotel in probably Tri-City I'm doing. And biggest feature I'm planning to do is a rooftop lounge, which is nowhere in the area, and it will give a unique prospect and different gatherings. I'm also looking forward to 5-10 years, and I'm going to have electrical car hookups and all that stuff in the parking lots. So this is going to be a nice piece of property, and with higher ed center right there with a lot of conventions and meetings coming up, this will be a great addition for the that exit.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more discussion, council? Roll call, please.
Mr. Craig?
Aye.
Ms. Patterson?
Aye.
Mr. Howard?
Aye.
Mr. Humphrey?
Aye.
And Mayor Lo?
Aye. Number 8, public hearing regarding consideration of First Amendment to an assignment and assumption of lease for communications tower site between Commonwealth of Virginia, Virginia Highlands Community College on behalf of State Board for Community Colleges, Town of Abingdon, Virginia, and Apex Towers, LLC of West Virginia, Limited Liability Company, Mr. Floyd Bailey.
Madam Mayor and members of council, in 2009, the town entered into an agreement with the Virginia Highlands Community College and the Community College Board, State Board, to place a 120-foot cell tower for use of the mesh network on their property. In the process of time, we've enjoyed that space, and realizing that we're about halfway through our agreement, we were approached by Apex Towers LLC with the need and for improved cellular access for the community college. Most people don't know of the difficulty of making a cellular phone call inside the buildings of the community college, but it's serious and it's potentially dangerous. So Apex Towers has entered into an agreement with Verizon to be hosted on a tower in that area, and they were looking for a location. Our tower, being there already, was taken into consideration, and so through discussions we have determined that the best course of action is for Apex Towers to actually build a new tower that would be a monopole style, would be able to hold the equipment needed to improve the communication for the university, community college, as well as host all of our mesh equipment. And they were willing to enter into that agreement for a grand total of 0 investment from the town to provide that tower, and the agreement for 20 years with the State Board of Community Colleges and Virginia Highlands Community College. And so through working up a new agreement, which I believe you should have in your packet, or I can give you one if you don't. It's a simple agreement. It's a win-win. The town gets, at this point, no cost, no maintenance, no continuing expenses, provision of our mesh network, and an agreement for another 20 years based on this agreement. And the university gets improved cellular connectivity and security and safety for the students that attend there. And Apex Towers gets a nice location to put a tower in the town of Abingdon and improve our connectivity. So my recommendation is that you authorize Mr. Kelly to sign this lease agreement. And if it's possible, because of the importance of time being of the essence in this matter, if we could dispense with any further need to go over this again, it would be very helpful to Apex and Verizon in moving forward.
Now, is this a new tower?
It will be a new tower sitting in the general location of the old tower. They're gonna leave the old tower while they build the new one right beside it, but it's right there in the same.
How much taller is it gonna be?
It's not gonna be much taller because in fact, the net gain of altitude is 0 because it's gonna go down in slope and up in height. So it's about a 10-foot taller tower, but it's gonna go down about 10 feet on the land. So your net gain is 0, but
And it complies with the airport overlay zone and the FAA.
all
height
that is an
restrictions.
agreement, all that's an agreement based on Apex Towers working through their permitting, and all of that still is a process they're doing without, the town has no concern as far as that goes. And the good thing is, our tower sits there, and if they hit a roadblock and fail, this goes away and means nothing. If they are able to fulfill their end of the obligation, then we get a new location, a new tower, and no expenses associated with it, so.
The other thing I would ask is that, it is a 20-year agreement, and a lot of things we'll do, that they're automatically renewable. Can we do this where it's automatically renewable, or that we have a potential of no cost for, say, another
Yep.
10 years?
There's
renewable?
two provisions in the contract for 5 years at a time, renew for 5 years, and then an agreement for the second, renew for 5 years. And so that's built into the contract. And really, we're writing on the contract in order to preserve our agreement with the community college. Truthfully, the community college has a right to build a tower without us and to do their own thing. So I sort of see this as them giving us a free opportunity to enjoy the benefits of a newer facility. And so I see it as a win-win for us. I don't see any downside for the town. I really see it as very positive.
Having some renewability
And, yes, absolutely.
isn't a plus for me.
Yeah.
I'm glad they didn't know about it until that you just told them.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, I've had that conversation. I'm like, what is in this for you? Been trying to figure that out.
They're good neighbors.
They are good neighbors. And the community college, to be honest with you, has said, look, we have an agreement with the town, and they've wanted to protect that agreement. So everybody's been holding up each other.
Good. Okay.
So.
Good for you.
Okay, so I'm going to open this public hearing, and would anyone like to speak regarding the consideration of the First Amendment to an assignment and assumption of the lease for communications tower site between the Commonwealth of Virginia, Virginia Homes Community College on behalf of the State Board for Community Colleges, Town of Abingdon, and Apex Towers LLC, a West Virginia limited liability company? Would anybody like to speak about the tower, Apex Tower on Virginia Homes Community College campus? And again, would anyone like to speak about the Apex Tower on Virginia Highlands Community College campus? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing, and council, what's your pleasure?
No, I'll make a motion, we go ahead and approve this based on Mr. Bailey's synopsis of what it involves.
And dispense of the second reading?
It doesn't require a
Okay,
second.
then-
Okay.
It just is.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any more discussion? So just to be clear, the airport overlay zone and the FAA requirements are Apex Towers still has to go through that, and they have to get those approvals.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Hearing no more discussion, roll call please.
Mr. Craig?
Aye.
Ms. Patterson?
Aye.
Mr. Howard?
Aye.
Mr. Humphries?
Aye.
And Mayor Lo?
Aye. Council, we are down to second readings, considerations of bids, and reports from the town manager and assistant town manager, consideration of moving the January council meeting because January the 1st and the 2nd is
They're closed that day.
is a holiday. I will tell you that I will be out of town until the 8th of January. So, if you would like to move it to the 8th of January, that would include me in the meeting, but it's up to you.
Sorry.
It's fine with me.
Okay. So we will move the January council meeting to the 8th at 6:30. And I need to put this in my phone to remind me. Okay. So the January council meeting is now going to be moved to January the 8th at 6:30 p.m. Do we need a motion for that?
No. I do have one other issue, if I could bring that up real
You
quickly.
can.
Legislative Day for VML is going to be on January the 31st in Richmond, and I wondered if any of the council wish to attend.
Do you have an agenda yet?
There is no agenda, it's for Legislative Day, so you just go and do visits and all those kinds of things. I do think they have something planned at 1 o'clock for a special session and lunch, I
And
believe.
usually the
That's
governor
about it.
speaks, usually the governor
That's
speaks,
usually
and-
when they do the mayor's.
And Dr. Northam will be the governor.
It's usually when they do the mayor's, if I were mayor contest, that's when they recognize the winners. The elementary school is participating, so I would assume that, yes, and if you could get our accommodations at Marriott or the
The
hotel
Hilton
across-
is the actual recommended hotel for it. They have
Okay.
the government rate, so.
Okay, at the government rate hotel.
Is
I
that,
appreciate
oh, and
that.
then there'll be the Library of Virginia will be where they have the.
Reception. Now, let's poll the council at this moment, who thinks they're gonna go, because there is a time that if you don't cancel your reservations, you lose the money. So, do you think you're gonna go, Ms. Patterson?
I'm undecided at this time, but I'll let you know.
Well, don't let me know, let Ms. Rosenbaum know, because she's gonna make our the ones that say we're going, she's gonna make those tomorrow or this week.
I'll find out what the deadline is for the hotel.
Yeah, find
and
out the
send it
deadline,
to
let us,
everybody.
if you'll let us know.
Sure.
I wanna, Susan's gonna be up, I'd like for she and I to go up that way, and then that way she can go to, get the grandchild, stay with them while I'm up
Okay.
there.
I'm gonna go.
Okay,
No.
Okay.
all right.
Now, before we get any further, folks, I'm gonna have to call a 5-minute recess.
You got the buzz?
Okay?
Okay.
All right, we are at 5-minute recess.
Christmas.
Was he in the sales at one time?
Ronnie?
Yeah, somebody said he was in sales and
Oh. He might have.
I sent my wife for milk and cookies, meat, milk and cookies.
Okay,
Today
so
National Cookie Day.
I'm going to call this meeting back to order. And we are down to council member reports.
Are we down to that?
Really?
We are down to council member reports, and then we have appointments to boards and committees after that. And I think we're probably going to have to go into closed session for this one because we need to discuss some things.
I don't have a report, Kathy.
Okay? Ms. Patterson?
Well, I just wanted to share some information in my council report to all the citizens here in Abingdon. Let me see, just give me just a second. There was some questions about the archaeologists at the Meadows during the project, and I wrote I had written Mr. Kelly an email, and he answered my questions for me, and I've got some more questions that I emailed today, and he hasn't had time, I'm sure, to look at those today. But I asked excuse me, who the archaeologists will be on site at the location in question at the Meadows, and when will the developer start the project as per the MOA. What are the fees per day? How many archaeologists will be on site? How will the developer manage observations of all sites in question? Will there be more than one archaeologist observing, such as, or like, what if the archaeologist cannot be there on a given day? Does the work cease until archaeologist comes back? Lastly, do we have a projection of how many days the archaeologist will be here? In regards to blasting for excavation questions, questions have arisen concerning the expectations. What type of notice and when will the area residents receive it prior to blasting for excavation? When will area residents be notified prior to blasting? What can area residents expect to experience when blasting begins, such as flying rocks, ground tremors, etc.? And Mr. Kelly did respond to me, and thank you so much, that we were going to, first, one archaeologist was required to be on the site, and it was his belief that on the commercial track that S&ME's archaeologist, Aaron Brummett, will be the one selected since he's done all the requisite, well, I can't say that word tonight, requisite, well, anybody want to help me with that word? Requisite, okay. Was I right the first time? Qualification that the Corps, DEQ, DHR, and ACHP require, and has done all the other archaeological work on site thus far. I'm unsure at the cost at this time. The contractor for Marathon indicated that it would be likely only take a few days to complete the work in the protected zones. The archaeologist must be on site each day that earth disturbing work is being done in the protected areas, or no earth disturbing work can be done in those areas. Second, relative to the blasting, it requires a permit from Chief John McCormick. He has already issued that permit and is good for 1 year. Yes, there are certain requirements for notifications to the public, and blasting monitoring is required to measure seismic data from the blasting, and Chief McCormick can fill me in. So I haven't talked to Mr. McCormick, but I'm sure he's willing to talk to me about this. And also, he is going to be, Chief McCormick is going to be monitoring the blasting as well. That's my report for that particular project. The questions that some citizens and I as well had. And also, in the meantime, the questions I have is due to livestock protection, and some questions about keeping them safe while this dynamiting and project is going forward. And so I hope to hear from you soon when you have time. in your
Yeah,
spare time.
I'm going to have to defer on the blasting to Mr. McCormick in terms of how all that works.
Okay.
And the proper notices. I do know that notices have to go out. Electronic equipment, transistor radio equipment is not permissible within the zones at certain times when all of this is going on. So there are other things. I'll try to address the questions you brought up today.
Okay.
As soon as I can get to those and get those back to you. We're going to be having some meetings in the next couple of days that should be able to provide me with the answers to those types of questions.
And the livestock questions, they need to be removed if there's like a livestock, cattle, horses, maybe, dogs perhaps. I mean, their hearing is very sensitive. So we need to discuss that as well. Would that be appropriate to say that we could discuss that at the next meeting, or do we need to have something before January to discuss blasting?
At the present time, Ms. Patterson, I'm not aware of when they actually intend to begin the blasting. I know it will be fairly soon, but they have a lot of prep work that they have to do. If you've been out there, they've started the prep work in terms of silt fencing and things like that. The defined protective areas will have to be fenced off before they can get into those areas, but it's my understanding that they intend to move forward in those protective areas first, just to get it resolved once and for all, and then move further along with everything else.
So the blasting is gonna be through the fire department?
Well, that's who monitors it.
Who's monitoring that?
But that's.
So you'll be notified of that, correct, John?
He has to be on site.
He's already issued the permit. He's the
Right.
permitting person.
And as far as the council, this is outside our purview, is to oversee any of this, is it not?
Right. I mean, we've got consultants that we'll have on site. We've got AMT that we're working with that will be on site, and we've also got town staff that will be out there virtually, some dedicated staff virtually every day that this is going on.
So is it beyond the scope to ask if Ms. Harmon and Ms. Patterson can be notified so that they can make accommodations for their animals?
As well as Mr. Hilton, Buck Hilton, and Mr. Nicewander. There's several people in that area that have livestock. And again, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I'm sorry, but dogs are, they're part family too. So, anybody with animals, when this blast goes off, they can, they'll hear it.
That's out of our purview.
Yeah.
That's will be all under John.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Anything else?
No, but I just wondered who was going to pay for the removal and boarding of animals.
I'm assuming that would be the responsibility of the landowner, the owner of the animal.
They're not the ones dynamiting, though.
I understand your concern.
Well, that's a discussion issue that several citizens, I'm sure, that have animals around the area are going to have those questions and have already approached me.
Well, the developer is the person that you'd probably have to contact. That is, that's who's going to be doing the work, so the developer would be the person that you need to contact.
And this is a public-private development as well.
Correct, but they're just dumping dirt on our property.
Yeah,
I don't think
be
we're
no
not.
blasting on our property.
We'll be doing no blasting on our property.
I think that's right.
We'll see.
Mr. McCormick, you have heard all concerns, correct? Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay. Mr. Howard?
No.
Mr. Humphries?
I just have one thing I want to bring up, and since we talk about the doors being open, since the doors are being open on On councilperson's reports to bring up matters not on the agenda and vote on them, I have one that I would like to bring up. It's one that's kind of sensitive, and I don't know that we can discuss it a lot. But it deals with a former employee of ours that has been restricted from being on town-owned property, or was at one time. And I would like to make a motion that those restrictions be lifted from Garrett Jackson.
Any town-imposed restrictions?
Yes.
Is that your motion?
Yes.
Okay. Do I have a second?
He is back in town, is that right?
That's correct.
What were the actual restrictions? Just not know.
Restrictions were not, I mean, he could be on, town rights of way and Creeper Trail and things like that. It was the spirit of the restriction was at the suggestion of the U.S. Attorney at the time, and that was to keep him from giving the appearance that he was representing the town in town events.
However, he's not, I don't think anybody thinks he is an employee anymore, and he has served his time. And, the town owns the ball fields and other places where his children frequent. And so I think that's the spirit of this whole thing. Is that correct?
Yes.
So, do I have a second?
I would like to second that, but it's a real, I think that things have already, he's probably, suffered quite, enough, and my heart goes out to him and his family, and we don't want to bring anything into the picture with the family, but I do want to sort of touch on that because I have a question, but may I?
You have seconded, so it's time for discussion.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I just wondered who put the restriction on. I know it was made by the U.S. Attorney, but was the council, the old council, the one that voted on this to restrict?
There was never a vote.
Never a vote.
We were talking, we were in close. Yeah. At the time, it was a human resource issue.
Yeah, it wasn't.
And there was
wasn't
no
our issue.
vote.
So, with Human Resources put that on him, and so that's why they all let him.
I'm not opposed to this at all. I just don't know why the restrictions were placed on it, and we probably can't discuss it, so.
We
Can't
can't.
discuss it.
I'm probably going to abstain from this because I know absolutely nothing about it.
I probably should have abstained myself because I wasn't involved, but can I retract my second? Because I think that's probably, it's really hard to make these decisions when you're up here live, and, you have compassion for people and, and their families and all. It's hard, to be able to talk about things you can't talk about.
It is tough.
And it's tough, and so, I'm not opposed to Mr. Jackson coming on town property. However, I think maybe I should retract my second because I wasn't involved either, so.
I'm not sure that any of us were per se involved, but I think that what we all are now, because he can't go on property, or he feels like he can't go on property.
It was as I recall, it was a discussion among the council. We brought to the council that it was the recommendation of the U.S. Attorney's Office, and there was no formal vote, but it was the consensus of the council members at that time to put the restriction on him, and I remember the day that we did put the restriction on him.
That was actually prior to his trial.
Yes, it was, and it was the day of the Over Mountain Victory Trail celebration.
Which at that time would have been inappropriate kind of for him to be on town property because people might have thought that.
Yeah.
But I don't want to go too far in the weeds with this because
But
it is a
anyway,
personnel
that's all I bring up is that the council discussed it, and it was their consensus, but there was never a formal vote taken. And we just went with the recommendation of the U.S. Attorney at the time.
Well, and my heart goes out to all involved, and even the town as well, so I'm sorry.
If I could add something, Mr. Kelly, if you'll recall, I know you recall, he was both an appointee and an employee, so that further complicated.
It did. So, all right.
Well, I'll go ahead and second Rick's motion, but, you know, if it's determined later on that he's attempting to represent the town again, I guess the restriction could be put back on. I mean, I'll go ahead and second your motion.
Okay.
I don't think it's gonna happen, but
Any more
that's
discussion?
possible.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Craig? Abstain.
Ms. Patterson?
I'll abstain,
And you all are abstaining. I need you to state your reason why.
because I wasn't involved in the council, or any involvement in that whatsoever, I wasn't even on the council.
Okay. And Mr. Craig, same thing?
Same reason.
Okay. Mr. Howard?
Aye.
Mr. Humphries?
Aye.
Mayor Lo?
Aye. Okay. I have several things that I'd just like to, I guess, maybe try to talk about. Number one, I think you all saw the email from the folks that use the dog park, and they have requested that we consider putting lights at the dog park now that we're back to not on daylight savings time. So I would just like to request that maybe Mr. Howard take this to the Recreation Commission and get their input, if you will.
We'll do it.
You know, you can have get those caving lights, and the caving lights like you put on a helmet, like a head, for the dog, just buy one for each dog.
And I have had a request that we look at a small dog park, because apparently the large dogs have taken over the other dog park. So I don't know if we have any ability to, or any property to look at, but
We talked about that over at Black's Fort
Yeah,
Lane
one time, yeah.
There's a group that's gotten together for Black's Fort Lane now, and it is, I don't know what they call themselves, but it was the Friends of Southwest Virginia, the lady that's up at that's taken that over, up at, now Todd Christensen's gone. And they've gotten together and they've been talking about several things, and one of them is to approach the town about having an open air art market down there, like on the weekends, is to have let artists come in, set up and sell their wares down there. That's one of the things they're going to do. So as you're thinking about that, it might be one of those things where we can see, what might be the better workable thing on that. That group is pretty dynamic. There's about 10 or 11 of them in that group. Janet Wilwine's one of them. Dirk up at Emory, Dirk Moore is up there. Kathy's on that. That's a good group.
okay. I got an email this afternoon from Hope All Is Well. I want to pass on an invite to you and your team to visit and tour the recently renovated Children's Advocacy Center of Highlands Community Services this Friday, December the 8th at 10 a.m. We'll also spend some time chatting about the needs in our community and some ways that we can make a bigger impact. Please see the message from Kathy Rourke. So it doesn't ask for an RSVP, but I would just like to let the council know that you have been invited to Highlands Community Services on Friday, December the 8th at 10 a.m. And I'm assuming
Is that our new building,
town staff. It says our team, so I'm assuming that includes all of our town staff. And so that's on the building on the hill where Dr. Triplett's office and all that is.
Yeah.
Okay? I had a question about, or actually, the farmer's market asked me about the $750 that we have in our budget for the pumpkin contest, and we didn't do the pumpkin contest this time. So, I would like to see if the council will agree to take that $750 and put it in the Tanya's economic development line so that she has some money to spend on some of her initiatives. That's not a lot of money, but it is downtown initiatives, and I think that that would be a good place to move that but I would need a motion to do that.
I so move. Second.
Okay? Any discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Craig?
Aye.
Ms. Patterson?
Aye.
Mr. Howard?
Aye.
Mr. Humphries?
Aye.
Mayor Lo?
Aye. Third thing, I just would like to get a report on where we are on updating. I know that we're doing a whole new website, but we discussed a couple months ago about updating the people that are currently businesses that are out and businesses that have come in. So if you will see if they've been able to update that list. No, we talked about it a
Yeah,
couple council meetings ago.
I think the holdup's gonna be, Amanda Livingston was working on that, and she's out on maternity leave.
It's in tourism,
Yeah, it's in
okay.
tourism, so.
I think
Unless
they-
I'm
Right.
maybe completely mistaken, but.
Well, let's see if we can't do something, because we've got new businesses that need a presence, and we've got old businesses that are not even there anymore, that are in that website, if we can. I think we have discussed that we lost a character with the town of Abingdon, which was Nisha Ronnie Reynolds, and we just wish his family great condolences in that loss. I had someone request that we consider turning the job site Johnny around that is facing D.R. Mullins's bed and breakfast on Park Street. If we would consider turning that around so that it's not facing any of those houses, and that maybe it faces either faces Washington County Life Saving Crew, or if it can be moved somewhere else where the doors to the job site Johnny is not facing someone's home. So if you'll just look into that and.
I've been working with Kevin Worley about that. The Muncie's had mentioned it to me, and I'd asked them to see if they could find a place that they thought would be suitable for all concerned. And it's really close to the shelter. So I think you're getting some in the summertime. You got a little bit of odor, and so but I'm not sure that there's a better place for it right now. It's one of those tough things. If you have it, it's where's it going to be?
The biggest issue, I think, too, is access, because you have to be able to, you have
Well,
to.
you have to pump it out.
Yeah, and where it is may be the only place that access is available right now, but we can certainly, if there's a way to do it, Kevin will find it.
They're just asking about turning it right now, I think it's.
Well, they actually ask about facing
Moving it, yeah.
facing that little lane that goes behind there, but just take a look at it and let us know what you think about it. White Elephant Exchange is when? December 21st. Council, I think you've been invited annually. If you have not participated with the town employees, you should. It's fun, and they are fun. So that's at 12 o'clock on December the 21st. And probably the final thing, we've got an abandoned car on our lot on Clark Street.
I saw that the other day.
It's been there since at least Saturday, I think maybe Friday night.
There were two guys working on it, but I guess they couldn't get it.
Yeah.
Oh, tag's still on it?
Yeah.
If the tags are on it, maybe Chief could run the tags and just get contact.
They had contacted dispatch when they broke down. They were trying to fix it themselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't turn my phone back.
Yeah, we know, we understand that.
Okay. I-
I saw
I'll
several
relay that
people out
message.
there working on it. They were trying their best to
Okay.
get it, yeah.
Okay, and that's all I have, except that I forwarded you all something that Mr. Kelly can probably tell you about the meeting, but the town of Abingdon actually has stumbled upon an opportunity that I actually sent an email to the Board of Supervisors and Jason last July 2016, and didn't get much of a response, but we have an opportunity now for the technology park to be included in the county's enterprise zone. Now, as far as I can tell, and as far as Joy Rumley has told me from DHCD, the town loses nothing, but here's what it gains. It gains that anybody that wants to build in the technology park will be eligible for state grant money. So that may help us build that technology park out, because that is a planned use development. It is not only, it's not restricted only to business. Condominiums can be built in there, and it is already shovel ready. So Mr. Kelly had a meeting with Mr. Berry, and I don't know that, you know, this actually is a county function, but I want the council to know about it in case you are not in favor of it for some reason, because I think the county is trying to move forward with including that in their enterprise zone. So,
So you're
Mr.
saying
Kelly.
the condominiums to be built?
Yeah, that's a planned use development. You could put hotels, condos, businesses, it's got a whole, it's got a whole plan.
Yeah, it has its own set of guidelines.
That's what I'm thinking.
So they cannot deviate from our guidelines.
Right.
They cannot change our zoning. So everything that we have in place will continue to be in place. The only thing it does is if somebody, like Kathy says, if somebody goes out there, they're eligible for some grant opportunities. Now, from what Jason told me, this is a work in progress, and this enterprise zone is quite large. It goes all the way from Oak Park all the way to Glade Spring, and maybe even over into the Damascus area. So it's stretching through a large section of Washington County in the towns, and before they can move forward, they have to notify each of the towns. It does not require any action by the town council. He asked me if I would just write a letter of support, which I'm happy to do, but he doesn't even have to have that.
Right. But I did want the council to be aware of that
Well, I thi- I
request
think-
for letter of support, so.
Well, I think it'd be nice if we would provide them a letter of support for that. I don't know how the other council members feel. It would be nice to have some more activity down there.
I think so too. Okay, so we are in agreement of the letter of support, council?
Yes.
Okay. All right, and the final thing that I was gonna say before we go into closed session is I was gonna congratulate Mr. Bailey on his new grandchild. I think there's another.
Behind the curtain.
He's asleep.
Yeah, Floyd, are you behind the curtain?
He's not here.
Oh, okay. Anyway, Floyd has a new grandchild that they adopted at birth, and he seems quite thrilled. So, council, we have appointments to boards and committees, Planning Commission, Board of Zoning Appeals, and Abingdon Redevelopment and Housing Authority. So we
We
could.
might be able to handle a housing authority out here, maybe. Without going into closed session. Is there, how many applicants are there? I think Tracy Meek has talked to several of us.
Yes.
And I think that we could vote on her for the housing authority.
She's a social worker, and she, let's see. She's on the Abuse Alternatives Committee.
I think she'd be good.
I do too, because
Okay.
she's into, helping folks, and she said she'd like to be on, and I talked to her today.
Well, I'll move that Tracy Meek be appointed to the Abington Housing Redevelopment Authority.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Craig?
Aye.
Ms. Patterson?
Aye.
Mr. Howard?
Aye.
Mr. Humphrey?
Aye.
Mayor Lo?
Aye. I did have one more thing, so I'm gonna deviate for a second. I noticed that the minutes say reappoint Gary Lester for Virginia Home Small Business Incubator Board.
That's a point.
So, if, I know we've already passed the minutes, but that is an incorrect statement in the minutes.
We'll get that fixed before either one of us sign off on.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so, council, if the council so desires, closed session pursuant to the Code of Virginia 1950 as amended for the purpose of considering applications to reappoint the position of the Planning Commission, Board of Zoning Appeals, and Fairview Foundation. Do I have a motion?
I see Fairview.
I didn't see the Fairview.
That was an error in the, when we moved the closed session from the last agenda.
Okay.
So
There's nothing for Fairview.
Planning Commission,
Good,
Board of
good,
Zoning
good.
Appeals.
That's it.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay. Roll call, please.
Mr. Craig?
Aye.
Ms. Patterson?
Aye.
Mr. Howard?
Aye.
Mr. Humphrey?
Aye.
Mayor Lo?
Aye.
Are we gonna take a minute or two break before we go in? For
No, we
rest
took
of
a
it?
recess.
Oh, yeah, you
already.
did.
But you can if you
I
have
didn't
to.
know, I don't have to. I can hold it.
Okay.
Oh.
Hold it.
Heather Howard on BZA. That's what's
Really, Mr. Craig?
Okay. So, as the clerk, do we make a motion to go back into open session first, right? And then you read the certification?
So moved.
And do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Roll call, please.
Mr. Craig?
Aye.
Ms. Patterson?
Aye.
Mr. Howard?
Aye.
Mr. Humphries?
Aye.
And Mayor Lowe, and forgive me, I had my certification and then I had to look something up and now I've lost it again, so bear with me just a
And I'll say aye and we'll let you look.
I'm so sorry. Thought I was ready. Okay. Whereas the council of the town of Abingdon, Virginia has convened in a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions set forth in the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. Whereas Section 2.2-3712D of the Code of Virginia 1950 as amended requires a certification by the town council that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. And now therefore be it resolved that the council of the town of Abingdon, Virginia hereby certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from an open meeting requirement by Virginia law were discussed in closed meeting, to which this certification resolution applies, and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered by the town council. If you agree, please answer with I so certify.
I so certify.
I so certify.
I so certify. Okay, council, we have a appointment to fill the unexpired term of Jan Reeves. What's your pleasure on the planning commission?
Madam Mayor, I would,
Move.
yeah, but I'm trying to think, move that we put James R. Anderson, I was trying to remember his middle initial, James R. Anderson, to fill the unexpired seat of Jan Reeves and the unexpired term.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Craig?
Aye.
Ms. Patterson?
Aye.
Mr. Howard?
Aye.
Mr. Humphries?
Aye.
Mayor Lowe?
Aye. Now, the Board of Zoning Appeals, we need two motions. So the first motion will be, if you please, to make Ramsey White, who is a current Planning Commission member, the Planning Commission member that serves on the Board of Zoning Appeals.
I so move.
A second.
Okay. Any discussion?
The only discussion is to let everybody know the reason that was done is that Ramsey was already on the Board of Zoning Appeals, and this keeps from having to have another person, since he's on the Planning Commission now, he can be their representative, and that just cleans that, that's housekeeping is all it is.
Right. Okay. Roll call, please.
Mr. Craig?
Aye.
Ms. Patterson?
Aye.
Mr. Howard?
Aye.
Mr. Humphries?
Aye.
Mayor Lowe?
Aye. And now we have an appointment to the Board of Zoning Appeals. Council, what's your pleasure?
I move that we nominate Miss Heather Howard for the appointment of that position.
Board of Zoning
I
Appeals.
second. Either take one of the two of us.
We have a motion and a second.
2 seconds.
We have 2 seconds. We'll give Mr. Humphries this one.
No.
Okay, any more discussion?
This person is not related to me.
You keep telling us that.
Of course I know.
She hadn't introduced herself as a cousin yet,
No,
right?
no.
Okay, all right. Roll call, please.
Mr. Craig?
Aye.
Ms. Patterson?
Aye.
Mr. Howard?
Aye.
Mr. Humphries?
Aye.
Mayor Lowe?
Aye. Okay, and then, I think that's all except for announcements, and the announcement is that the, annual Christmas program is at the Barter Theater on December the 6th. The annual holiday open house at Arts Depot is December the 7th. Over 50 Expo at the Higher Ed Center, December the 8th. Santa's Elves Workshop, Holidays in Appalachia, December the 9th, William King. Abilene Farmers Market, Holiday Market, December the 9th. January Jams kicks in on January the 5th at the Barter Theater. And the 2018 Master Gardening Training Program, is that held at the Higher Ed Center?
Yes.
Okay. So if anybody's interested in that,
Is there gonna be a town dinner or anything, you know, for the?
I think that White Elephant thing is what
Oh,
the
the
town
White
does.
Elephant,
There's
that's
not a
right.
dinner.
There
or
is a
White
Christmas
Elephant.
breakfast.
Oh, yeah,
on
that's right.
December the 19th.
Okay, the
Okay, so
Christmas
that's not
breakfast.
in there. Okay.
Is
Now,
that gonna
the
be?
White Elephant is not a town thing, that is just for the town, the staff here at the town hall.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So the Christmas breakfast is gonna be held at the Coon Center
Yes, on December the 19th.
on December 19th, at
Yeah.
what time?
It will be from 8 to 10,
And
Well, we
who's
received-
invited?
all 5 of the council
Oh,
members.
okay, thank you.
We got an
You're welcome.
invitation on that.
Yeah, you should have already gotten something, but I can't guarantee that you
I
did, I don't know.
don't know.
Is that December the 19th?
December the 19th, yes.
And
I
that's,
didn't get it.
I think Stacy said it.
Yeah, that's what, I think Stacy Reichler sent it out.
What
for
time
next
is
month.
it? 8 to 10?
8 to 10.
All right.
I missed that one.
I did too.
Okay. December the 19th.
Can I say something?
Yes, you may.
Maybe for the council, from the council and Mr. Kelly and maybe Miss Cecile here, Merry Christmas to everybody here. I hope everybody has a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and the same to you all.
Yep.
Thank
To
you.
Thank you
We
very
do
much.
too.
Thank
Same to
you.
And as Tiny Tim said, God bless us everyone.
Everyone.
That's right.
That's right, we need blessings.
Okay, well, if there's nothing further, I do wish everyone a Merry Christmas and
Happy
hope you
holidays.
enjoy
Happy holidays.
uh,
Our Jewish friends.
Yep, that's right.
all of your time with your family, or I hope you get to spend some time with your family. We are adjourned.